phone call came on a Tuesday in November and I almost didn't answer it. I was elbow deep in flour making the pecan pie my late husband used to ask for every Thanksgiving, the one I still make every year even though there's nobody left in this house to eat it but me. The number was unfamiliar. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up anyway because at 73 you stop ignoring strange calls. Sometimes they're hospitals, sometimes they're funerals. It was neither. It was a young woman from a women's shelter in Gallup, New Mexico, and she said she had a girl there who claimed to be my granddaughter. I sat down on the kitchen stool so fast I felt my hip pop. "Mom, she says her name is Whitney Caldwell. She says her father was your son Edmund. She has a baby boy. She's been sleeping in her car in our parking lot for 9 days because we're full. She finally came inside this morning because the baby spiked a fever." I couldn't speak. I had not heard my son's name spoken out loud in almost 6 years. Edmund had died in a single-car accident on a stretch of highway outside Flagstaff in February 2020, 3 weeks before the world shut down. I had buried him. I had stood at his grave in a black wool coat while his wife Tricia held my hand and told me she would bring my granddaughter to visit me every summer. Whitney had been 13 years old at the funeral. She had her father's chin and her mother's eyes, and she had hugged me so tight my ribs ached for 2 days afterward. And then Tricia had stopped answering my calls. I had tried. God help me, I had tried. For 2 years I called every week. I sent cards. I sent checks for Whitney's birthday that came back uncashed. I drove the 10 hours from Boulder to Phoenix once, in the summer of 2021, and stood on Tricia's porch ringing a doorbell that nobody answered. A neighbor told me they had moved. Nobody knew where. My letters started coming back, marked "Return to Sender" in red ink, and finally my lawyer told me there was nothing more I could do. A daughter-in-law has the right to disappear with her child, he said. I had no legal standing. Whitney was not adopted by me. She was Tricia's blood, not mine, and the courts would not help. I cried for 2 years. Then I stopped crying because my husband Howard got sick, and I had to be strong for him until he passed in 2023. After that I just got quiet. Quiet is what happens when grief runs out of places to go. And now there was a voice on the phone telling me Whitney was alive and had a baby and was sleeping in a car in New Mexico. "How old is the baby?" I asked. My voice did not sound like mine. 14 months. His name is Theodore. She calls him Teddy. "Is she safe right now? Is she hurt?" "She's thin, Mom. She's very thin. And she's scared. She gave us your name and a phone number she'd memorized. She said she didn't know if it still worked. She said her mother told her you wanted nothing to do with her." I closed my eyes. Something hot and old moved up through my chest. "Tell her I'm coming," I said. "Tell her grandmother is coming tonight." I hung up and called Howard's nephew Russell, who runs the small charter aviation company my husband left him a half stake in. Howard had built that business from one twin-engine Beechcraft in 1978. I had not asked Russell for anything since the funeral. He answered on the second ring. "Aunt Margaret, is everything okay? I need a plane. Tonight. Boulder to Gallup. I'll pay whatever it costs." He didn't even ask why. He said the King Air would be fueled and ready in 90 minutes. I packed a duffel bag with sweaters and a stuffed rabbit I'd been saving in a hall closet since 2014, the one I had bought for Whitney's 8th birthday and never gotten to give her because Tricia said Whitney was going through a phase about stuffed animals. I packed a checkbook. I packed Howard's old Pendleton blanket because the desert nights get cold and I didn't know what condition the baby was in. By midnight, I was wheels up over the Rockies, watching the lights of Denver fall away behind me, and for the first time in years, my hands were shaking from something other than age. The shelter was a converted motel off Route 66, one of those long, low buildings with a hand-painted sign and a chain-link fence. The director, a woman named Roberta, with kind, tired eyes, met me at the door at 2:30 in the morning. She walked me down a hallway that smelled like instant coffee and pine sol. Whitney was in a room at the end of the hall, sitting on the edge of a twin bed with the baby asleep against her chest. She was 19 years old now. She was the size of a child herself. Her hair, which had been a long honey-brown river the last time I saw her, was chopped short and uneven, like she had cut it herself with kitchen scissors. There were dark hollows under her eyes that no 19-year-old should have. She looked up when I came in. She did not stand. She just stared at me, holding the baby tighter, and her face did something I will never forget. It collapsed. That is the only word for it, like a house giving way after a long flood. "Grandma," she whispered. I crossed the room in 3 steps and I sat down on the bed next to her, and I put my arms around both of them, my granddaughter and her baby, and Whitney started to shake. She did not cry loud. She cried the way people cry when they have learned to cry quietly so nobody hears. The baby sat right through it, his little fist curled against her collarbone. "I thought you hated me," she said into my shoulder. "I thought you didn't want me. Honey," I said, "I have been looking for you for 6 years." She pulled back and looked at me with such confusion that I realized in that moment that everything she had been told about me was a lie. Every Christmas card I had sent, every check, every voicemail. She had received none of it. She had grown up believing her grandmother, the only blood family she had left after her father died, did not want her. "Mom said you stopped calling after Dad's funeral," she said. "She said you blamed her for the accident. She said you told her I reminded you too much of Dad and you couldn't bear to see me." I felt the room tilt. "Whitney," I said carefully, "your mother told you that?" She nodded. "And then last year, when I got pregnant, she said you'd be ashamed of me. She said you were the kind of woman who'd disown a girl for getting pregnant out of wedlock. She said don't even try to call you. She said you'd hang up." I held her face in both hands. I made her look at me. "I did not stop calling. Your mother stopped answering. I sent you a card every single birthday until I couldn't anymore. I sent money for your college fund. I drove to Phoenix to find you in 2021 and the house was empty. Your mother told me she would bring you to see me every summer and then she vanished, baby. She took you and she vanished." Whitney started to shake again, but this time it was different. This time it was the shaking of a person who is having every story she has ever been told about herself rearranged in real time. "Where is your mother now?" I asked. Whitney's mouth twisted. She kicked me out when Teddy was 3 months old. She said the baby was too loud. She said her new husband Greg didn't want a screaming infant in the house. She said I'd embarrassed her enough already. She gave me $400 and the keys to the Honda. "Her new husband?" I said. "They got married last May. He's an oil and gas consultant. They live in a big house in Scottsdale now. I called her 3 weeks ago when the car started making a noise and I was running out of formula money. She told me to figure it out. She said I'd made my bed. I sat there in that little motel room at 3 in the morning in Gallup, New Mexico, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt rage. Cold and slow and clean. I had buried my son, and his widow had spent 6 years feeding my granddaughter a poison about me, and had thrown her out with a baby, to sleep in a Honda. "You're coming home with me," I said. "Both of you. Tonight." Whitney looked at me with the most exhausted hope I have ever seen on a human face. "Grandma, I don't have anything. I have a diaper bag and a car that doesn't start half the time." "You have me," I said. "That's what you have. And I have a house with 8 rooms in it and nobody in any of them. So you are going to come home and we are going to figure out the rest as we go." By dawn we were on the plane. Teddy woke up somewhere over Albuquerque and started to fuss, and Whitney pulled out a bottle with hands that still shook a little, and I held him while she warmed it under her arm, and he looked at me with these enormous grey eyes, my son Edmund's eyes, and I felt something in my chest that had been frozen for a long time start to crack open. I did not say anything to Whitney about her mother on the flight home. I let her sleep. I held the baby and watched the sun come up over Colorado. And I thought about all the things that did not add up. Tricia had been a flight attendant when she met my son. They had lived in a small apartment in Tempe. Edmund worked construction. They were not poor, but they were not rich. After Edmund died, there had been a life insurance policy, a modest one, maybe $400,000, which had been paid out to Tricia as the beneficiary. That had seemed reasonable at the time. A widow with a teenager and no degree. She would need it. But Scottsdale, a new husband who consulted in oil and gas, a house big enough to refuse a grandchild a bedroom, something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and I had been too sunk in my own grief to see it. When we got back to Boulder, I put Whitney and Teddy in my guest room, which I had not used since Howard's sister had visited 4 Christmases ago. I made oatmeal. I called my doctor's office and got an emergency appointment for the baby that afternoon. The fever turned out to be a routine ear infection. He was malnourished, but not dangerously so. Whitney weighed 104 pounds. The doctor pulled me aside and said, in the careful voice doctors use when they don't want to say the word neglect out loud, that both my granddaughter and her son needed sustained, stable nutrition and rest. That night, after Whitney fell asleep with the baby tucked against her side, I went into Howard's old study and I called a man named Desmond Aldridge. Desmond had been Howard's attorney for 31 years. He was retired now, 80 years old and a widower himself, but he still took calls from me. I told him everything, the shelter, the lies, the life insurance, the Scottsdale house. I told him I wanted to know what had happened to my son's money. I told him I wanted to know what my daughter-in-law had told my granddaughter for 6 years, and I told him I wanted to know if any of it was a crime. Desmond was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret," he said finally, "let me make some calls." It took him 11 days. In that time my house came alive in a way I had forgotten houses could. Teddy learned to clap. Whitney slept 14 hours one night and cried when she woke up because she thought she had dreamed me. I taught her how to make my mother's biscuits. She showed me how to swaddle the baby properly. We took him for walks in the cold Colorado sunshine and I bought her a winter coat because she only owned a denim jacket. She tried it on in the store and looked at herself in the mirror like she wasn't sure who was looking back. She started telling me things, slowly, like a person letting air out of a tire. Her mother had remarried Greg 18 months after Edmund died. Greg had 2 grown sons of his own and had not wanted Whitney around. Whitney had been pulled out of her good high school in Tempe and put in a much worse one in Mesa, then a worse one in Phoenix. Tricia and Greg had moved 4 times in 5 years. Each move, Whitney said, was because her mother said they needed a fresh start. Each move, Whitney lost what few friends she had managed to make. When Whitney was 17, she had started dating a boy named Cody from her high school. Cody was kind, she said, in the way she said it. I could tell he had been the first person in years who was kind to her. They had been together for almost a year when she got pregnant. Cody had wanted to marry her. He had a job at a tire shop. He was 18 and stupid and good. Tricia had told Whitney that if she kept the baby, she could not bring it into Greg's house. Whitney had moved in with Cody's mother in a trailer outside Yuma. And then Cody had been killed in July. He had been riding a motorcycle without a helmet, and a man in a pickup truck had run a red light, and that was the end of Cody. Whitney had been 6 months pregnant. She had gone back to her mother because she had nowhere else to go. Tricia had let her stay until the baby was 3 months old. Then she had put her out. I listened to all of this with my hands folded in my lap, because if I had moved I would have broken something. On the 12th day, Desmond came over for dinner. He brought a leather folder. He waited until Whitney had taken Teddy upstairs for his bath. Then he sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he opened the folder. "Margaret," he said, "your son had 2 life insurance policies, not 1. I stared at him. The $400,000 policy through his employer, yes, that was paid to Tricia as beneficiary, but Edmund also had a private policy he had purchased himself 2 years before he died, through Northwestern Mutual. $1.2 million. The beneficiary on that policy was Whitney. A trust was supposed to be established for her, to be administered by Tricia as guardian until Whitney turned 21. The kitchen was very quiet. "What happened to it?" I asked. Tricia drew it down. All of it. Over 5 years. There are records of every withdrawal. Real estate down payments. A timeshare in Cabo. A Mercedes. Jewelry. 2 cosmetic surgery clinics in Phoenix. The Scottsdale house. Her husband's failed startup. It was Whitney's college money, I said. It was Whitney's college money, I said. It was Whitney's college, housing and inheritance, Desmond said. It was meant to keep your granddaughter safe for the rest of her life if anything happened to her mother. And it's gone. There are perhaps $11,000 left in the account. I held the edge of the table. There's more, Desmond said. He turned a page. Last summer, when Whitney was 17, Tricia contacted a probate attorney in Phoenix. She inquired about having Whitney declared an unfit guardian of any future inheritance. She told the attorney Whitney had been hospitalized for mental health issues. There was no record of any such hospitalization. The attorney drew up paperwork. It was never filed because the lawyer required medical documentation Tricia could not produce. But the intent was there. She was setting up a legal framework to take control of anything that might come to Whitney later, including any future inheritance from you. I had to breathe through my nose for a moment. There's one more thing, Desmond said. He pulled out a single envelope. It was yellow with age. The handwriting on the front was my son's. This was found in your son's safe deposit box at the credit union in Tempe. The box was put in your name as secondary contact, but Tricia never told you about it. It went unclaimed long enough that the bank attempted to contact the primary holder, but she'd moved. It came back to me through the bank's legal counsel last week when I made my inquiries. The envelope said, in Edmund's blocky handwriting, "For Mum, in case." I opened it with hands that were not steady. The letter was 3 pages long. It was dated October of 2019, 4 months before he died. It said that Edmund had been worried about Tricia for some time. He had discovered she was hiding credit card debt from him. He had discovered she had been telling her sister that she was unhappy in the marriage. He had set up the private life insurance policy, in case anything happened to him, because he did not trust Tricia to take care of Whitney financially. He had told me in this letter that if anything ever happened to him, I should fight for Whitney. He said Whitney loved me. He said Whitney needed me. He said he was sorry for putting this on me, but he could not think of who else to write to. He had ended the letter with this: "Mum, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to fix things myself. Take care of my girl. Don't let her grow up thinking she was alone." I put the letter down. I covered my face with my hands. And for the first time since my son died, I let myself cry the way I had not been able to cry at his funeral, because at his funeral I had been holding Tricia's hand and trying to be strong for everyone. Desmond waited. He was a good man. He waited until I was done. Then he said, "What would you like to do, Margaret?" I wiped my face with a napkin. "I would like," I said, "to invite my daughter-in-law to dinner." It took 2 weeks to arrange. Desmond reached out through Tricia's old attorney, the one in Phoenix who had drawn up the unfiled paperwork. The pretext was an inheritance matter. Howard's estate, Desmond said, had finally cleared probate, and there were certain bequests Margaret wished to discuss in person. Specifically, a matter concerning her late son's daughter. Tricia came. Greed is a leash that pulls harder than shame. She arrived on a Thursday in early December. She brought Greg. They drove up from Scottsdale in a white Cadillac SUV. Tricia was 46 now, and she had clearly spent a great deal of money on her face. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat. Greg was a tall man with the sun-leather skin of someone who has spent a lot of time on golf courses pretending to be richer than he is. I had Whitney and Teddy stay upstairs with my friend Roberta from the shelter, who had flown up at my expense. I wanted them safe. I wanted them not to hear. In my dining room I had Desmond. I had a younger attorney named Carrie Worth, who specialized in elder financial abuse and fiduciary breach. I had a forensic accountant Desmond had hired, named Vincent Rowe, and I had 2 manila folders in front of me. I let Tricia walk in like she was attending a luncheon. She kissed my cheek. She said, "Margaret, it has been so long." She said, "You look well." She introduced Greg, who shook my hand with a grip designed to be felt. They sat down on the side of the table I had laid out for them. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Please, sit. Let's start." Tricia settled into her chair with the smile of a woman who believed she was about to be given something. "Margaret," she began, "I was so surprised to hear from you after all this time. I hope you understand. The years after Edmund's death were so hard, I just couldn't bring myself to—" "Where is Whitney?" I said. Tricia's smile stuttered. "Just barely. Just for a second. Whitney is at college, in Arizona. She's doing very well. She's a sophomore." I let the silence stretch. "She's at college," I repeated. "Yes, Northern Arizona University. She's studying nursing." "How is the baby?" I asked. Tricia's face went still. "What baby?" she said. I did not answer. I just looked at her. Greg shifted in his chair. "I'm not sure what this is about. We were told there was an inheritance matter." "There is," I said. "We'll get to it." Desmond opened the first folder. He placed a copy of the Northwestern Mutual policy on the table. He placed a record of the withdrawals next to it. He placed a copy of the unfiled guardianship paperwork. He placed a copy of the title to the Scottsdale house, showing the down payment had come from a wire transfer originating from Whitney's trust account. Tricia looked at the papers. She looked at me. The colour drained from her face the way water drains from a tipped glass. "Margaret," she said, "I don't know what these are supposed to." "I went and got her," I said. "What?" "I went and got her. I got her 3 weeks ago. She was sleeping in her car in the parking lot of a women's shelter in New Mexico because you put her out with a baby and $400. She and Teddy are upstairs right now in my guest room. He had an ear infection. She weighed 104 pounds. She thought I hated her because for 6 years you told her I did." Greg looked at his wife. He did not know. He had not known. I watched it land on him. Some men are villains, and some men are just married to villains. Greg, I could see, was something worse than a villain. He was a coward, married to a thief, and he was just now realizing he had married a thief. "Trish," he said low. She didn't look at him. "Margaret," she said, "I can explain. The money. The money was for the family. The family includes Whitney. I made decisions in her best interest. I was her mother. I had the right." "You had no right," Carrie Worth said, calmly. "Under Arizona revised statutes, a parent serving as trustee for a minor's inheritance has a fiduciary duty. The funds in that trust were not yours. You spent them on yourself. That is conversion. It is also, given the size, a felony." Tricia started to cry. She was good at it. She had probably been good at it her whole life. "I was a widow," she said. "I was alone. Margaret, you have no idea. You told my granddaughter," I said, "that I hated her. You told her that I blamed her for her father's accident. You told her that I would be ashamed of her for getting pregnant. You told her I wanted nothing to do with her. You took her away from the only blood family she had left after my son died, and you spent her father's money on plastic surgery and a timeshare. Margaret, please. And when she came back to you because she had nowhere else to go, with a baby, my son's grandson, your grandson, your grandson." "He's not," Tricia started. The room went absolutely still. She stopped, but she had started to say it. "He's not what?" I said quietly. She did not answer. "He's not what, Tricia?" Greg stood up. He pushed his chair back. He said, "I think I need some air." He walked out of my house and he did not come back. I heard the Cadillac start up in my driveway 20 minutes later and drive away. He left her there. When the front door closed, Tricia sagged into her chair like someone had cut a string holding her up. The performance was over. There was no one left to perform for. Greg was gone. Her future was gone. The lawyers around the table had a record of everything she had done. "I never wanted her," she said. It came out of her like a confession that had been pressing against the inside of her teeth for 19 years. "I had her because Edmund wanted her. After he died, she just sat in my house. She had his face. Every time I looked at her, I saw him, and I needed to move on. I had a right to move on. I had a right to move on. I had a right to a life. You had a duty," I said, "to your daughter." She started to laugh. It was an awful sound. "You don't know what it was like, Margaret. You don't know what it's like to be left with a teenage girl and no income and bills and a house you couldn't afford. You don't know. You had $1.6 million, Tricia. You had me. You had my number. You had my address. I begged you to let me help." She had no answer for that. The detectives came an hour later. Desmond had timed it. Carrie had filed the complaint that morning. They walked Tricia out of my dining room in handcuffs at 9:15 at night, and she did not look at me again on her way out. The house was very quiet after the door closed. I sat at my dining room table and I put my forehead against the cool wood and I let myself shake. Upstairs, I heard Teddy laugh. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. What came after took months. Tricia was charged with felony fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and several lesser counts. She pled out the following spring rather than face trial. She received 42 months in state prison and was ordered to pay restitution she would almost certainly never pay. Greg filed for divorce within the week. The Scottsdale house, purchased with stolen money, was seized and sold. Some portion of the proceeds came back into a new trust, this one with Carrie Worth as trustee and Whitney as sole beneficiary. It was not the full amount, it was enough. I will tell you what enough means. Enough means Whitney went back to school. She got her GED in April. She started community college that fall. She wants to be a nurse, like she told Tricia she already was, except now she actually will be. She has 2 more years. Enough means Teddy has a bedroom with airplanes on the wall, because Edmund had loved airplanes when he was a boy, and his son will grow up loving them too. Enough means I have a reason to make pecan pie again. There was one more thing. In July of that year, on what would have been my son's 45th birthday, Whitney and I drove out to Flagstaff and we visited his grave. She had not been there since the funeral. She was 20 by then. Teddy was almost 2. We brought flowers. We brought the letter Edmund had written me. We read it out loud to him. Then Whitney sat on the grass and she said, "Grandma, I want to ask you something." I waited. "Would you adopt me?" I looked at her. "Legally," she said, "I want my last name to be Caldwell again. Not hers. I want Teddy's last name to be Caldwell. I want to be your daughter on paper, not just your granddaughter. Is that a strange thing to ask?" I could not speak for a moment. The wind moved through the pines and the late summer light came down through them in pieces, the way it does in that part of Arizona, the way it had on the day I had buried my son. "It is not a strange thing to ask," I finally said. "It is the only thing left to do. We did it that fall." The papers were filed in October. The judge was a kind woman who read Edmund's letter into the record at my request. She said in 20 years on the bench she had rarely seen an adoption proceeding so plainly correct. So this is how the story ends. Not in a tent. Not in a courtroom. Not with a woman who confused her own daughter for an inconvenience. It ends in my kitchen on a Sunday morning in the spring. It ends with Teddy in a high chair smearing applesauce on his face and Whitney studying for an anatomy exam at my kitchen table, and me at the stove making French toast the way Howard used to make it for our son a long time ago. It ends with a girl who was told her grandmother did not love her finding out that her grandmother had been looking for her for 6 years. It ends with the truth. If you are watching this and there is someone in your family who has been kept from you, who has been told lies about you, who has been used as a weapon by someone who confused control for love, please do not give up on them. Do not assume the silence is theirs. Sometimes the silence is being held over them. Sometimes they are waiting for someone to come find them. Sometimes all that is between a lost child and a found one is one phone call on a Tuesday in November. I almost did not answer. I will be grateful for the rest of my life that I did. I have thought about that Tuesday in November more times than I can count, the flower on my hands, the phone I almost let go to voicemail, the way a single decision made in less than 3 seconds changed the rest of my life and the rest of 2 other lives that did not yet know I existed in any real way. What I keep coming back to is this. Tricia did not become a thief overnight. She did not wake up one morning a stranger to her own daughter. She made small choices, year after year, that were each easier than the last. The first lie about me was probably the hardest one she ever told. After that, every lie was just maintenance. She spent Whitney's money one withdrawal at a time. She moved towns one move at a time. She walked away from her daughter one closed door at a time. Nobody becomes cruel in a single afternoon. They get there one comfortable shortcut at a time, and by the time they look up, they are someone they would not have recognized at 25. I used to be angry at myself for not pushing harder during those silent years. I called, I wrote, I drove to Phoenix. And then I stopped because my lawyer told me to stop, and because Howard got sick, and because grief is heavy and I was tired. I am 73 years old, and I am still learning that being tired is not the same as being defeated. There is a difference between resting and giving up, and I had let the line blur. Whitney paid for that blurring. Teddy paid for that blurring. I cannot undo it. But I can refuse, for whatever years I have left, to ever again confuse exhaustion with surrender. The thing I want any woman my age to hear is this. Your instincts about your own family are not paranoid. They are not sentimental. They are information. When something feels wrong about how you have been cut off from a child or a grandchild, it usually is wrong. Somebody is usually doing something. Quiet is not always peace. Sometimes quiet is the sound of someone working hard to keep you out of a room where you would have asked the right question. Whitney did not survive 6 years of being lied to because she was lucky. She survived because something stubborn in her remembered a phone number from when she was 13. She held on to the shape of a grandmother she had been told to forget, and when she had nothing left, she dialed. That is not weakness. That is the deepest kind of strength a young person can have, the strength to keep one true thing alive in your chest while everyone around you tells you it is dead. We do not get to choose what is taken from us. We do get to choose what we still walk toward, even on the worst night, even with a sick baby in our arms, even when the parking lot is cold. Whitney walked toward me. I almost did not pick up. Between her courage and my last-second decision, a family came back. Pick up the phone, make the call, drive the 10 hours. The cost of trying is almost always smaller than the cost of the silence that follows when you don't.